Hello, everyone. I am Nikos Papaioannou, and I will be the moderator of our final session on the subject NBA and European basketball bridge the gap. Before we begin, I would like to thank the front runners in Sports Management 4.0 hybrid web conference for the invitation. We are so happy and proud that we will close this conference with such a very interesting subject and obviously speakers. Please don't forget to follow and use the conference's official hashtag FrontRunners 2022. And let's welcome the Euroleague legend, the good friend, Joe Arlauckas, and the head of PR and board of directors member of the Hellenic Basketball Federation, Konstantinos Asimakopoulos. Thank you for being here. I want to share with you that from the time I was a young NBA reporter in the mid-90s, I always remember the late executive legends, David Stern and Borislav Stankovic, discussing at various points on how they can bring the NBA and the European basketball together, sort of bridging the gap, which is today's topic. I remember also numerous times in David Stern's press conference during the All-Star weekends and the NBA Finals, talking about having an NBA team in Europe and obviously the NBA expanding with the team in Europe. I must say that yes, the NBA has come close to Europe by scouting the hell out of the European players. In the beginning of the current NBA season, 56 players from Europe they were under contract with NBA teams. And at the same time, numerous players from Europe are playing college basketball in the US. Having said all that, I think it's an illusion to say that, that Europe is bridging the gap with the NBA. My take in this is that the NBA is taking over European basketball. And Joe, I would like to hear your opinion first because you are a product of the US basketball system. You played for Niagara College. You were selected in the NBA draft from the Sacramento Kings. Who briefly played in the NBA before you blossomed.
Briefly. Thank you.
What's your take? I mean, is European basketball closing the gap with the NBA, or the NBA is taking over the European basketball?
I think first of all, thank you for front runners and for everybody else for always thinking of me and active media and all the people behind this. And thank you guys for having me in this session. I think I kind of have a good opinion of it because I lived through those David Stern times, and I lived through the initial reaction of European players making their way to the NBA. When I first arrived, it was before I arrived, there was Bob McAdoo who left the NBA to go to Milan. And we in the States as Americans, we were like, wow, well, what's Europe? As America, we don't even know. We know what Europe is. We don't know what Italy is. We don't know what Spain is. We know what it is, but we don't know where it is. A lot of people in the States still think that Puerto Rico is right next to Spain, because they both speak Spanish. And so I got to see this whole bridging the gap thing, as we call it here today. And like you said, the word illusion is maybe a strong word, but I think it's a correct word also, because it's just something that's never going to happen, I believe, because of so many different possibilities and so many different angles of not only the sports related part of it, but the business side of it. And it changes
and the logistics, right?
Yeah, it's all logistically, it's difficult. The NFL, the American football, they always talk about having a team in Europe, even though they come every year and they play games here. And logistically, it's difficult, but the business side of it is difficult. The players, the way they play here is different than the States. But mostly, I think, to bridge the gap, it's a financial thing, because the way the NBA is run is a franchise, and they build an empire to make money. And here it's not like that. And they would have to change the mentality here in Europe for them to actually ever bridge that gap. And David Stern was, of course, the ambassador for the world when he was the commissioner.
Yes, David Stern was he was the patriarch of the globalization I'm not going to say only for the NBA, but in general, the game of basketball, because NBA is basketball as well. And he was the one that he strongly believed, but at some point he also saw the logistics of such thing, that there could be an NBA team in London. But when the NBA sat down and they put everything down, they saw that it was impossible to do this, because you cannot have one team in London and then the other 29 teams traveling to London to play that team at some point, or the team from London going to the NBA and staying there for a month, traveling around like a circus and playing all these games. But the globalization of the league is something that we live. The league has become global. We have seen international players, not only European, but international players dominating the 2020-21 All-NBA teams, with Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Bucks, with Luka Doncic, with Nikola Jokic, with Rudy Gobert. So the talent is here in Europe, but at some point it has a really short stay, because NBA is calling up more money, more opportunities, and in the end of the day, the dream of every basketball player is to go and play in the mecca of basketball, which is the NBA. I want to hear the take on this of Konstantinos, who represents here the Greek Federation as well, but is also somebody who has been involved in the basketball. Konstantinos, what's your take on the subject?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm very honored to speak with you today. With Joe, Euroleague legend, and with you, Nikos. Over the past 3 decades, the European basketball has definitely influenced the NBA. It's undeniable. The 3 main MVP contenders are not US players. As we know that both Giannis, representing Greece, and Nikola Jokic, representing Serbia, come from the European continent. Moreover, the top 7 rebounders in the NBA are currently Europeans. And as you mentioned before, the NBA teams have to spend a very big portion of their resources for the international scouting. This is something that also Joe knows. So today, teams in the NBA, that they are not focusing on Europe. They're not interested on what the European talents are doing. We can say that they are putting themselves behind the curve. But we have to learn more as Europe from the NBA. The NBA is progressing, it is expanding, it is using its power to generate revenues and profits, while teams, and this is the problem, while teams in Europe are struggling to generate financial profits from the competitions in Europe, while the NBA is leveraging its power in other regions. And the example of the China is very, very interesting, because the profitability of the NBA product has skyrocketed. I think that we are close to bridge the gap, but in the beginning we have to find which are the elements that could bring us together. NBA has huge TV and sponsorship deals, while in Europe it's not a very easy environment. And it's not surprising that private firms in the US want to get into the business of the NBA. On the other hand, those global firms are not very interested in the European project. And this is because of the marketing, of the sponsorships, of the revenues, and the merchandising. So I have to say that we have to make a new line of interest that could definitely help the European basketball create a solid strategy to bring change, create growth prospects, and come closer to the NBA. The NBA model is something that we have to watch. It's very interesting because they bring the best practices, and we have to start thinking about how to find ways to attract new capitals, new funds, new fresh ideas in Europe, and to make our system, let's say, interesting too. Undeniable, the European basketball is still very popular, very, very popular, creating talent. We have long history, we have tradition, we have a huge fan base deriving from the teams, because I think, and Joe can confirm it or not, that in the US, the fans are following the stars, the players. In Europe, people are following the organization, the teams. There are some differences, but in the end of the day, the sport is one, and it's a common sport, even if the rules are different, etc. I think that we are very close to bring some of the elements of the two two sports together, to the European sport and the NBA sport. Recently, we had some meetings with NBA executives, Mr. Thimis Regias, a Europe legend too, being in the BOD of the Greek Federation, and he's an ambassador also. We had some contacts with the NBA, with some NBA executives, in order to find ways to cooperate. And I think that we are in an era that this is much more possible than it was in past decades. The bridging the gap between NBA and European basketball. But we have a lot of work to do in Europe also to strengthen the product.
I want to say here, and obviously we want to hear that what Joe is thinking, and if Joe, you believe that one thing that is right now one of the biggest differences of NBA and European basketball is, let me say, the philosophy around the game. NBA is a players' league, no doubt, and European basketball is a coaches' league. By saying that the coaches' league, that means that, you know what, European coaches in general, they don't really let a player improvise during the game like an NBA player can do in the league, and sometimes this is taking the spectacular of the game out. Do you believe with this? Do you believe this?
Yeah, you know, I my constant point over the last 10 years since I've been back to Europe and working a lot closer with Euroleague is again, we mentioned this before. I think the product on a nightly basis, the Euroleague is a much better product than the NBA, especially regular season. Because, you know, the Euroleague's motto is every game matters. And it's true. You know, in the NBA, you can give up 3-4 games when you go on the road, and you could rest your best players, and you can do things like that. Here, you can't do that. Every game, every night matters because you're fighting for position. So that gives the intensity more of a college-like atmosphere.
That's true.
And I love the product. I can't watch an NBA game during the season. It's unbearable. They're too long and they're too boring. In the playoffs, I could watch them. But I think that this player gap has been bridged a little bit because players are getting more opportunities now. Back when, you know, guys like Juan Carlos Navarro from Spain or Spanulis went to the NBA, nobody believed that these guys can do what they do. You know, and you can't tell me that Spanulis, who's obviously one of my favorite players of all times. I think he's probably the best European player I've ever seen. And you can't tell me that Spanulis can't score 24 points a game on a nightly basis in the NBA. Even when he was at his younger moments, you know, I think if he had the opportunity, he could have been a player that produced more. And what you were saying, Nick, to me is the most important thing. Is the only thing that bothers me about Euroleague is that there's no stars anymore. There's no Spanulis anymore. There's no Juan Carlos Navarro. There's no Sabonis. There's no these guys that that were go-to guys, you know. Jasikevičius when he played in Barcelona and when he played in Panathinaikos. I mean, those were the guys that I wanted to watch on TV. And now I don't like we were saying, we don't watch the game for the players anymore. We watch the game either out of interest because I like basketball, or sorry about that, or we watch the game because we follow a certain team. But I miss there's a repression of players here in Europe that evolves in the NBA because they have more opportunity there. Luka Doncic in Europe would play 16, 17 minutes a game and score his 16 points and have his 7 assists and have his 4 rebounds. And it's evident when you give a player more time and more freedom and more ability to play, they're gonna produce more. But here there's a repression of the players, and I don't think it's a conscious thing that they don't want to have a star on each team or 2 stars on each team. Like the NBA usually has that three-man team, you know, the package. And I just think here we're missing that star quality in the old players like Jasikevičius, like Spanoulis, and I just miss those guys a lot when I watch games.
And I think Joe and Konstantinos, that we're right now facing something that the European basketball has never faced in the past. To have, let me say, 2 level of players, to have upcoming NBA players that you know that they will not stay more than 2 years in the team that they play, like Luka Doncic, for example. And then you have, let me say, the non-NBA players that could blossom into European stars. And that's where European basketball needs to focus. Let's say a player like you mentioned Spanoulis. Spanoulis went to the NBA. He didn't find his space there. He came back. He played, and he was a star. A guy like Yul, a guy like Slukas, who never played in the NBA. I think the teams need to find a way to market and to identify the star players that are not that good to be NBA stars, but they are good enough to be European stars, and they feel comfortable with being European stars. So there they can build on these players. Otherwise, we're gonna see the phenomenon of great players leaving after 2 or 3 years, going to the league and maybe blossoming there. But even if they don't blossom in the league, the money gap is so big that you're like, you know what? I might prefer to play in the NBA and being on the bench of an NBA team and making $5 million a year versus playing in Europe, playing 80 games and making barely a million euros. It's the economics of the thing, don't you think, Konstantinos?
Nick, the big thing is it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop at the 5 million. It starts at that point, because if these players can stay long enough, 3 years, they get a 50% pension in their future. And in 6 years, they get I don't know if those are still the numbers. They were the numbers when I was in the league, but
the 3 years, it's still, you know, the mark you need to hit to get your pension, which is very important. And players, like, let's say an example of who has a player that has a Greek passport, and it's Tyler Dorsey. He wants to get back to the NBA for that 3rd year.
You're talking when you turn 55. I'm good friends with Zan Tabak, and we had lunch together yesterday. And he played, you know, Indiana, Toronto. He won the NBA championship with Houston. And when he turns 55, I mean, you know, his pension, he could either take it all in one lump sum, or he gets paid monthly, you know, for the rest of his life. And that's the difference, because me as a former player, I had to build that myself. I had to invest my money so that I could have income coming in when I'm 56 or 57. And it's not easy to do with the kind of money we make, or we made back then, or they make now, because, you know, 30, 40, 50% goes to taxes. You always want to buy your car, you want to buy your house, you know, and you don't have anything to fall back on when it's all done. And if you're in my position and you go through a divorce, then you have a woman to take 50% of it on top of it. And this is a big issue for players, you know, and that's why if I had the opportunity to stay in the NBA for more than 5-6 years, of course I would do it over Europe, no matter where I was born or no matter what passport I had.
Exactly, exactly. Konstantinos?
You know what? This is a vicious circle, let's say it. The creation of talent in Europe is much connected with the future of the European basketball and the European leagues, both national leagues and the European, let's say, big league. So we have to focus on the youth programs. We have to focus on the development system in order to create new stars, to create uh, new basketball players that could chase their dreams, both in European leagues and the NBA. So we have to both rise the level of the NBA, of the European leagues, the level of the European national leagues, the level of players, and the youth programs. Let's see the examples all over the Europe, where the youth programs are not much connected with the leagues, the national leagues. And at the end of the day, we see a lot of teams, except from, let's say, not more than 4 teams, like Real Madrid and other teams, that they use their rising stars. In Europe, the big organizations are not leveraging their power of young talent and in chasing a possible win or a championship. They are trying to use players that have some experience, and they're not, let's say, using the players. They're not using the youngsters on the game. So we have to focus there. We have to give the opportunities to the rising stars, the younger stars, the young players to come up, show which are the strengths of the European basketball. So there are a lot to be done. But at the end of the day, if the players are not emerging, so the European basketball has to create more talent, more stars, more possible stars. And when the teams are going to use their stars in the game, in the big competitions, under pressure, they will find their way to the sponsorships, to the revenues, and to a more prestigious league. The example with Giannis is very, very interesting. The biggest player, the most, let's say, intriguing player in the NBA now globally, never played in a big team in Europe. He didn't find his way in a big team in Euroleague, not even in the domestic league. Maybe it was an exception, but the example is very, very interesting. What we have to do is to try and focus on the youth program, wait and find out what the win is. The win will be for the European basketball. So we have to create the opportunity for a better youth program all over Europe, and then focus on how we can create the possibility let's say, persuade these players to stay in the European basketball more than 1 or 2 years. But Nikos, you mentioned something in the beginning of our conversation about the expansion of the NBA to Europe, and allow me to make a small comment. You said about the possible scenarios of expanding of the NBA in London. During the digital age, the NBA has already expanded to Europe without having to spend anything on logistics and, let's say, overseas trips. The NBA has already expanded in Europe remotely and has a very big slice of the basketball pie. Uh, the financial challenges of the European basketball nowadays are becoming bigger and bigger, while the NBA grows and emerges. And I think one of the main and the core issues is what we are discussing, uh, the interest of the possible stars to stay in Europe more and then uh, become NBA stars. But we have to utilize what we have. They are the basketball. So we have to create, let's say, more stars and focus on the youth program.
I think, first of all, Konstantinos, that's a very interesting point. Regarding the expansion, the talk in the NBA in the 90s and in the early 2000s was of expanding with an NBA team in Europe. Obviously, the power of the web has helped NBA to expand, as you said, remotely. And I believe that right now NBA is synonymous with basketball, whether we like it or not. And at the same time, I need to point here that there is zero, and if not zero, if I'm overreacting, and John knows that sometimes I do, but I believe that there is no really interest outside of Europe for European basketball. Let's be honest with that. I mean, no one will stay up in the US or will rather wake up early to watch a EuroLeague game unless he is from some of the countries that are involved in this game. So I believe that what the powers that be need to focus also as well is making an attractive product and trying to market it in other markets as well.
You know, Nico, it's funny because the same thing happens now to players that happened when I was playing. You know, when I do my podcast, when I do the crossover podcast, you know, and I talk mainly to the American guys. It's really funny because the people in the States that love basketball still come up to you as hey man, where you playing? And hey, I play in Europe, man. I play with Olympiacos. Like, oh yeah, it's like, you know, my best friend plays in a team in Belgium. And, you know, it's like nobody realizes, you know, and I can remember back in my day, it was like, oh, okay. And nothing against Belgium or, you know, Belgium basketball.
Yeah.
You know, or you know, my best friend's playing Euroball too, man. He's in the first division in Poland. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, and it happened to me, you know, I'm talking 30 years ago, 25 years ago, and it's still happening now. So your point about the fact that there's no exterior knowledge of European basketball if you're not connected to it directly. And that's why the pitcher that's right behind over your right arm, one of the guys most important is Johnny Rogers, who's
exactly.
Who's constantly in Europe scouting players and bringing them back to the States. So you blame that guy right behind you. He's a good friend of mine. And they cut Johnny in Sacramento for me. So that's how Johnny and I became friends. But those are the guys that come over, they scout the talent. And Konstantinos, your point is great. I love your point about developing the players. But the more you develop the players, the more the NBA snatches them up. So the EuroLeague, unfortunately, in one way or the other, becomes like a farm club for the NBA.
I think that the focus, Konstantinos, and obviously since you are also the representative of the federation, I think that there should be a shift of focus when European basketball is going to market its product, which is the European basketball. I think the best platform, or let me say the best vehicle on doing this, I think are mostly the national teams rather than the clubs, because you touch to some ethnicities that probably are immigrants in the United States of America, for example, because there are Greek communities, there are Spanish communities, there are Serbian communities, there are Russian communities, and so on. So by marketing the national teams, where obviously the star players are usually NBA stars, like Slovenia has Doncic and Dragic, Greece has Giannis and Thanasis, Spain had Pau Gasol, and when he was all these years, one of the biggest ambassadors of Spanish basketball. I think the clubs will not be able, they don't have the mechanism to do such things.
Exactly. And that's why our major challenge in the national federation, Greek national federation, is empowering the national team uh, by bringing all the stars together in the national team after some years, because the issue of the European basketball, uh, and here is the point of the NBA, because NBA, as you said, they are the best marketeers of their game. They know that the players, the European stars, uh, are some very popular figures that also they are generating revenues for them. And let's say it's simple: why the NBA to let the European players come and play in the European national tournaments? So I think this is a point where we have to bridge the gap with the NBA to find the common view and empower the European tournaments of national teams. Every year, we better, and Joe also, that the last few decades, it's very difficult for European stars playing in NBA to join their national teams of in all over the countries, Greece, Spain, and this is why, as a federation, before a week, we had our representatives in the US in order to contact with Yanis in order to come and play in the next European tournament. So I think that we have to make progress on this. We have to uh, have some more confidence as European basketball. We have to be better marketeers of our product because the players are the core value. So why a fan to come and watch a game between, let's say, Spain and Greece when all the big stars are in the same time in the US playing there, and they don't join their team. I think that we have to make a better structure of the European basketball, the national teams, because NBA is doing its job very, very good. The NBA executives are growing their product, and what we have to do is learn from them and have better structure of the tournament, persuade the players to come and play. Let's say them that where you have to come to play, not for the let's say for your passion for your country, but because it is a very interesting tournament, and you have to gain from this tournament also, and then the revenues will rise, the interest will skyrocket, and the future of the European basketball will be better. We are currently making some steps forward to grow the basketball through initiatives, but this has to be done as a main strategy of the European basketball and not from the countries remotely. Nothing could be done if the Federation of Spain, or the Federation of Greece, the Federation of Italy try to make steps forward alone. We have to unite to find the core ideas, the ideals of the European basketball that give us players, moments, and we are proud of the European basketball. We're very proud. We have a very big history, and we have to leverage it. So we are in a very crucial moment that if we don't bridge the gap with the NBA now, the NBA will be far away from the European basketball, and I have to recognize it. So we have to work together for the next day of basketball and promote our sport. I'm very, very keen on working on it, and I think that uh, nowadays, because the NBA they recognize that European players now are the biggest stars, among the biggest stars. We said previously that Jokic, Giannis are the biggest figures nowadays. Doncic are the biggest figures of the NBA. We have to make them to understand that by uh, leveraging the power of the European basketball, NBA will also have gains, and we see that it's not, let's say, a dream. It's happening. So we have to find ways all together in Europe to create a more intriguing and a more attractive product, uh, and come closer. Why not to the NBA? Let's say way.
Konstantinos, that sounds good and it's beautiful, and I wish that would work. But I did a little research before we started, and you look at the New Jersey Nets, or the Brooklyn Nets, I guess, were sold this year to a Canadian billionaire for $3.2 billion, and they're the seventh most profitable team in the NBA. The most profitable team, as most of us all know, because of Madison Square Garden and TV contracts, is the Knicks, who haven't been in the playoffs for I don't know how many years, but they continue to be the most profitable team at $5.8 billion a year. While on our European side, 99% of the team are using the basketball program as a tax write-off because they're losing money. And that's the only way that you're going to get European stars to stay here, is to be like, listen, I had a 12-year career, and my focus was, I wanted to win championships because I could always have that trophy, and the championships that I won, I hold here dear to my heart. But I only had 12 years to make money out of this game. And the separation of the money I made playing a professional sport to the money I started to make when I was an ex-athlete, a retired athlete, is so immense. It's here to here that I never even got a grip on getting paid. You know, maybe now I do a speech and I get paid 2,000, 3,000 euros. But if you told me that the year after I got done playing basketball, I would have said, you know what I would have said.
You're gonna say, take the 2,000 euros and don't call me again.
Exactly. But now that money to me is like, okay, that's the money I live on. So that's what I like, you know. And so to bridge the gap, we talked mostly about players here in these 45 minutes we had, but to really bridge the gap, and it's a point that you make, Konstantinos, is the clubs have to figure out, or all of Europe has to come together and figure out some sort of business plan to make a franchise or a club or whatever you want to call it profitable, and not rely on a bank coming in and giving you X million dollars, or a sponsor coming in and giving you X million dollars, because that money runs out when you have a pandemic or when everything else. And one thing a guy said to me in Spain, and I'll cut short because we have 4 minutes left, I want you to finish, Nico, is it was one of the most amazing things to me, because I played in a team that was called Cajaranda when I first got into Spain. Now that team became, then that being whatever, now it's Unicaja. And he said to me, the problem with European basketball is children don't identify with European basketball, because when a child comes up to me and says, oh, you played professional basketball, what team? And I say Cajaranda, they didn't know Cajaranda was.
But they know Real Madrid.
But they know Real Madrid, because, or they know Olympiacos, or they know Panathinaikos, but they don't have anybody to identify with because of sponsorships, because it's Baskonia is a great example. Baskonia is always Baskonia, but Baskonia has 3 sponsors every year.
Yeah.
They take sponsors 3 times a year. And that's where I think the major change has to be made.
That is true, Joe, and that's a very valid point. And obviously, I think that at some point, and this is something that also all the federations in Europe need to reconsider. The European basketball cannot be divided in different European leagues because with European basketball doesn't have that luxury of splitting in various leagues. It needs to be one big league. It needs to be an exciting league, and I truly believe in order to give also motivation to the domestic leagues, I truly believe it should go back in the same way like football is doing it, like Champions League is doing it, by giving the opportunities to the teams in the domestic leagues that are doing well to get that ticket, to punch that ticket to go to the top European competition. I think that's also of great importance in order, to start having the best of all the teams of European basketball. Because now, let's be honest, we're talking about a divided product as we speak. We have only 2 minutes left, and I really want to, first of all, I want to thank the American College of Greece and the front runners in sports management 4.2 hybrid web conference, and also Active Media for putting this together and having such great time with you, Joe, and with you, Konstantinos. I'm looking forward to next year's event to be a fully physical event because I think we have missed that. We have missed the, let me say, the personal contact. When we are tired of going into Microsoft Teams calls and having the opportunity, to discuss things virtually.
I'm tired of not sitting down with a frappe and some octopus, man, and being in Greece. That's what I'm tired of.
That would be a much better conversation.
Exactly.
Very interesting. And thank you very
both.
much for the invitation once again, and both Active Media and the front runners. It's very interesting to have conversations with legends like Joe, with you, Nikos, and I think that we have to promote our sport now. That let's say we have to create a new era for the European basketball. I truly believe it.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you have enjoyed this session, and hopefully we will see you again live next year in the front runners in 2023. Have a great night.